To introduce our next speaker, Sister Norma Pimentel. She's presently the Executive Director of the Catholic Charities in the Rio Grande Valley, a missionary religious sister of the Missionaries of Jesus. She's been in charge of the Catholic Charities branch down in Brownsville, Texas, in the Valley since 2008. She's a daughter of Mexican immigrants. She grew up crossing back and forth from Brownsville to Matamoros to be with family on both sides of the border. It was while her parents were awaiting response from U.S. authorities on their application for residency that Sister Norma Pimentel's mother gave birth to her in Texas in 1954. She says, "I'm a U.S. citizen by chance. I grew up between the borders on the frontiers, enjoying life in both countries, Mexico and the United States." She received a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree from Pan America University, a master's degree in theology from St. Mary's University, and a master's degree in counseling psychology from Loyola University in Chicago. I've been in communication with her and her leadership down in the Valley for some time, trying to line this up and getting her involved in what's going to happen tonight at the church. And I hadn't got to meet her until yesterday afternoon. I saw her sitting in the back, and she was walking over to get a glass of water. I just ran up to her and gave her a hug. And later said, "Oh my God, did I cross?" She said, "Oh no, I'm a hugger too." So let's welcome Sister Norma Pimentel to share with us.
Thank you so much. I got a cold right before I got here, so I went straight to a night clinic, and they put 2 shots on me and fixed me up. But my voice is a little nasal this morning. But anyway, thank you so much for the invitation to come here. Oh, I'm supposed to turn this on, Jose. There you go. Now, we don't need this one. Very good. So thank you. I would like to begin by starting to talk to you about who I am and how I came to be here today in my life, how things have changed for me. You know, back in as I was introduced, my parents came to the United States, mostly because of my dad, who had this dream, the American dream that so many families want to share with their family, and mostly my father was a man who was very focused in his family and making sure his children would grow up and have an opportunity in life that would give them the chance to be who they're called to be. And so he thought coming to America would be the right choice. So he came to the United States, and here I am. So I guess I have to say that he got in that process of who I have come to be by initiating me to be here in the United States, in the southern part of Mexico, United States, very border with Mexico. So I entered religious life in a similar way. It happened because actually I had plans to do something with my life. I didn't know quite what that was. I knew it had to do possibly with the fact that I'm an artist. I love to paint and draw. I always knew that since day one when I was growing up. I went to my first grade teacher had me do a mural of the nativity in the whole wall, you know, and so it was something that was so good for me. I loved to do, and so when I went to college, I studied art. And my dad had other plans for me. He didn't really want me to just go on my own and just be by myself. He comes from very conservative families, and women, his daughters, were going to have to stay home, get married, be a teacher, and y se acabó, you know? That's it, you know? So I said, no, Dad, I have other plans for me. I don't know what they are, but definitely something within me was calling me to something else. And so since I wasn't going to be able to continue my professional career on my own, I chose to go back to school. And when I did that, I was waiting back home waiting for things to kind of like move forward, and the day for me to go back and to I applied in Austin for a degree in architectural design, and I was waiting for that day to just get myself to. Thank you. Actually, I already have water. Somebody brought it to me. Muchas gracias. So when I was waiting, I was kind of playing it safe so I wouldn't go out or do anything that would make my dad kind of like say, no, mijita, you're staying home. You're not going anywhere anymore. So I didn't want to rock the boat, and I wanted things to be good. And I never went out just to play it safe. And one day I just got so tired of not going out, and I decided to call this friend of mine who my father liked. She was a very pious and nice girl. And I said, Linda, what are you doing tonight? And she said, we're going to a prayer group. And I said, what are you doing after the prayer group? And she said, we're going to Pizza Hut. And I said, great, come pick me up after the prayer group. So Linda said, no, Norma, you have to come to the prayer group because we're not going to go back for you and then come back. No, you come to the prayer group and then we take off from there. So I said, okay, fine. So I sat in the back. It was the time of the charismatic renewal, and all these people were in this prayer group kind of sharing, pouring out themselves up in public, and I was like, wow. And so anyway, at the end of the prayer group, they called everybody to sit in a circle, and they would pray over you. And Linda knew what I was going through with my dad. So she said, Norma, sit down in the circle. Let's pray for you. I said, sure, I have a headache and hasn't gone away. So I think it'll help maybe. And so I sat down, and all these old ladies and everybody just put their hands all over all of us. And believe me, I don't know what happened in that prayer circle, but something changed in me. I felt something that is hard to explain, but I was all of a sudden drawn to continue going to that prayer group. And after that, I just went on my own. And I just wanted to know more about God in my life. And to the point that my mom said, ¿Es que te vas a hacer monja? Are you going to become a nun or what? Because she was seeing me just reading the Bible, reading and going out to prayer groups and everything. And I said, what if I am? And sure enough, I decided I went to a retreat for vocations that one of the sisters in that prayer group was part of, and she invited me to it. And I said, well, that's for sure. My dad won't say no. I can go to this house because it's retreat, and he will agree. And so I did. And they asked me if I wanted to join the religious life, and I said yes, just like that. So my life moved in another direction, close to God, and to look at what it means to serve Him. The sisters that I joined, Missionaries of Jesus, it's a very small community that came from Spain, Madrid, and they just stayed there in the Diocese of Brownsville. The sisters were very involved with the immigrants because back then there were no detention facilities, and Border Patrol would call them if they could take a family, a mother with children, to stay at the convent. And so right from the start, I started to become part of what it meant to be an immigrant, and the whole reality of immigration and families torn and scared and frightened, and they became part of our community life. Soon after I joined, the bishop asked our community if we could oversee Casa Oscar Romero. It's a shelter right at the border where hundreds of thousands of families were arriving. And they were not detained by immigration. They would just cross the river and ended up in our house. And we oversaw that for 10 years. What was interesting about my experience with immigrants was Sister Juliana Garcia, who was in my life my mentor. She's a sister from Spain. She passed away about 4 years ago. And she was the one who very clearly started to help me define who I am today. One day, we were going to to lunch. The two of us live 24/7, every single day at the house, and the two of us would take care of everything that happened. It was amazing, the Casa Oscar Romero. We saw the atrocities that families from El Salvador, Nicaragua, during the time of Oscar Romero, and what they went through and the tortures that they endured and experienced while they were in those countries. And we would see men that would say how they would pull off all their nails from their hands, and you show them, and they didn't have any nails, And so story after story of what these families were encountering in their own country, and we were receiving these families. So one day we were going to lunch, and Sister Juliana said, Norma, today there's a group of people speaking up in defense of the people we're helping, and we know exactly what they're going through. Let's go support them for our lunch, And we went to the congressman's office, and there was a group of people praying and singing and waiting for the congressman to respond. Why are you sending $1 million a day to support these wars in El Salvador? And the manager of the building decided that he didn't want this group there, so he called the cops. These people were going to go do civil disobedience. I was just learning all these terms and all these things. Back then, I was 25 years old. And this was going to happen at the end of the day when the office was closed. They were going to say, we're not going anywhere, we're going to stay here. But it just so happened that when we arrived at noon, the manager decided to close the building, and call the cops. So Sister Juliana turns to me and says, the cops were there, and they started to arrest everybody, and I would just keep it. And she says, turns around and looks at me, and she tells me, Norma, in life, you cannot run away when you believe in something and things get tough. So we cannot both get arrested because, somebody has to run the house, the shelter. And so you tell me who it's going to be. Smart lady, huh? Here I was 25 and she was 50, so I figured, I said, well, I guess it's me, right? And sure enough, and then she goes, okay, bye. And so I go like, okay, what does this mean, So for sure, everybody was being dragged out of there. The cops were pulling them. They didn't cooperate, so they just had to drag them out. And as soon as I just kept putting myself back, and finally it came to me, and I said, don't worry, I walk. I won't drag myself. So sure enough, they put my handcuffs and took me to the police car. And all this time, there were so many things conflictual in me that was happening, I grew up told that I could always to obey the law. I should never break any laws. The officer tells you to go, you move, and you do whatever he says. And so all of a sudden hear things about who I was and what my country is telling me to do, and then all of a sudden my faith is telling me different, And so I had to stand up for what I believed my faith was calling me forward. I believe that we all have these kind of decisive moments in our life where it defines who we are. It goes right in front of what it means to be, to have God in our life, and what is God asking you to be and to do. And so those moments like that was very defining for me, helped me to be who I am today. If it weren't for Sister Juliana, who in a very gentle, direct way, formed me to be able to know how to make the right decisions. She didn't make them for me, but she certainly put me on the right path. And so this is how it started. And now recently, we are living in a circumstances very similar to that time that we lived in the 80s. Now today, the same thing. Sister Juliana, before she passed away, she got to see the first massive groups of people that were coming to the border south by McAllen, Texas, because she came and I took her to the bus station, and she said, Norma, it's the same as Casa Romero, except now it's children. It's so many children. You know, it's amazing. Out of the people that we see every day at our house at the center, the respite center, more than 52% are children, and they're children under 10 years old. And this is who we're helping today in McAllen, Texas. And to this day, we've helped over 150,000 people since that day that we opened the doors of the respite center in 2014. We just celebrated 5 years of being there and continue to be there to this day. And just this week, we've seen people up to 900 to 1,000 people a day at the respite center, a day. Yes, it's. I'm sure those numbers will drop because things are happening today that will indicate that that's going to happen. Mostly because of the policies that our administration is doing, where they are forcing people that are coming into our country to remain in Mexico so that they can wait for the asylum there instead of in the United States, which puts a terrible burden on the Mexican government and the Mexican community, which they don't have the resources like we do in this country. And also, the families will be exposed more to greater danger and abuse from the traffickers and so many people that are out to hurt them and take advantage of them. So what I want to share with you today about being leaders in today's world, in today's time, is the fact that we have to recognize, as our Holy Father has continuously told us, about the fact that we live in a throwaway culture, you know, this culture that gives rise to a humanity that is filled with conflicts and pain, and it's happening more and more in our communities, and how we are divided and how easily we can become indifferent to the suffering of humanity, of people that are suffering. And so I think that we all have a responsibility to do something about that, to help us be able to change that, to help people that we lead, that see us as leaders, help them recognize that we do have a responsibility to do away with this indifference, as if it's okay to discard people because they are different from us in some ways, and to not recognize them as human beings, and to be okay that it's not my problem, so therefore I have nothing to say or do. So our country is suffering of grave humanitarian problems. We see a lot of people that are families that are separated. We've heard that last year, where we heard the children crying when they're in detention, separated from their parents. I remember back in last summer, we received way over 600 families that were reunited after being separated from the zero tolerance policy that went into effect, a policy that was heartless, you know, didn't care about the pain and suffering that it was going to produce to the families and the children, and separated children from their parents for months. And when they were able to reunite some of them, we were fortunate and privileged to have been the ones that received them. I remember how day or night, it didn't matter what time they would drop them off, because I wanted to make sure that as many families they could release, we would be able to receive them and help them so they wouldn't stay one more day in detention. One night, close to midnight, I remember this child, I was walking with her mom to a room at the Basilica in San Juan, Texas. And the child looks up to me and she says, "Hoy no voy a llorar." Today I'm not going to cry. "¿Por qué, mijita?" And she said, "Because I have cried every single night for a whole month since I was separated from my mother. But tonight I get to sleep with her." It is this reality that we see, and it's hard for me to understand how it is that we can allow this. And yet there's so many children that were not able to be reunited because There's no way for them to know where their families are and how to reunite them. When they went ahead and did this policy, they were not thinking about the fact that they would ever reunite them. And this is happening here in our country. But I think that somebody, all of us, must take responsibility to do something about holding our leaders accountable, what is happening and what we are doing. So just recently, I just heard the news, and maybe you have too, about some children that were found dead right at the border, dehydration. 2 toddlers and a child, infants, and a 20-year-old. This is something that is happening a lot. These are families that are trying to enter our country because they're fleeing a very difficult situation back home. These are not criminals. Yes, there may be criminals entering, but I'm certain that the Border Patrol makes sure that they don't enter our country because that's their job. They release only those families that they know are not a threat to us and that are looking for asylum, for life, for opportunity to live. Because back home, it's very dangerous to be there. So people are suffering. And we are silent. There definitely needs to be an appeal decisively and promptly to do something. As leaders of today, we must express the gospel in practical ways. What you have done for the least of my brothers and sisters, that you have done to me. Matthew 25. The Holy Father always challenges us to change our hearts to human suffering. It is as if, I believe, it almost feels that it's as if nobody feels responsible. We hear so many things happening, but we don't do anything about it. In some ways, I think, as he also says, our Holy Father, that we live in a culture of comfort. We think only of ourselves, make us live. It's almost as if we live in a bubble, you know? I would say that people protect themselves from not feeling uncomfortable. And so they choose not to feel or to see, so that way they can continue being okay. So I say I go around popping bubbles, you know? So they can see things for what they are. Because I believe strongly that when we see, we will respond. I remember back in Casa Romero, I had to buy a Xerox machine. And this lady comes over, she's this lady from one of the Xerox machine companies, and first thing she introduced herself, she said, "Sister, I don't believe in anything you're doing here. I'm against 100% that you help illegal aliens. But I'm going to sell you my Xerox machine because I'm a businesswoman, you know?" And I said, "Okay, thank you. Let me show you what I do and why." And so we went and walked around. I showed her, introduced her to the families and the children, explained to them why they were there. And when we get back to the office, she turns around and looks at me and she says, "Sister, I'm 100% in favor of what you're doing." Totally changed. That night I got a call from her husband and she said, "I don't know what you did to my wife, sister." But she came home and she told me, "If sister ever calls you, you make sure you do whatever she asks, okay?" So I'm calling to let you know that if you ever need anything, let me know, okay? So, you know, I believe in people. All they need to do is come and see. When you see the children, like I have, back in 2014, when I responded, I took the lead to to respond to the many families who were at the bus station in terrible conditions. They were dirty and muddy and hungry and scared and crying, mothers on the floor. They have no idea how to get in a bus, how to buy a ticket. They didn't have money. And Border Patrol was just dropping them off, because they didn't have room to keep them in detention. And there wasn't another detention to send them to. So they caught them, processed them, released them so they can continue their process wherever it is that they were going. And there they would continue whether they had a right to be in the country or not. Let somebody else figure it out. So there were so many children that were unaccompanied. They came with somebody other than their mom or their dad. So because of this law that President Bush put back in his time, children that were from another country other than Mexico were needed to be protected from human trafficking. And so therefore, they could not be released. They had to keep them and pass them on to Office of Refuge and Resettlement, ORR, under HHS, all these acronyms. So anyway, so Border Patrol had thousands of kids, little ones, not more than 10 years old, 5, 6 years old. And they were all in this detention facility that could only hold at one time 300 people, because it was nothing else than processing. The people would enter after they were apprehended. They were processed, check who they are, send them to a prison, send them to an adult detention. And the kids needed to be sent to ORR. But they weren't prepared to handle that volume of children. They need to have a bed space for every single child. And so Border Patrol was forced to keep the children in that detention facility. That was no condition for children or even for that many people. And they were there without showers, because they didn't have showers, without a kitchen, because they didn't have a kitchen. They would send them, give them whatever they could, like frozen burritos or whatever they could give them for the day. And they were packed. I mean, literally packed. The kids could not even sit down, much less lay down, not for 1 day, 2 days, or a week, or for almost a month in that condition. And they were forced to keep them there. They didn't have a choice until they could come up with another facility up to code. And I said, up to code? What is this that you have here, It's definitely with no violating every single code you might have in the book. I visited that center. I asked a local official if he can give me permission. Nobody had ever entered those facilities. And they did let me go in. And I saw these kids looking through this glass window, all those little faces, just scared, full with tears, looking at you like, please help me. And I asked to go inside, and they said, no, sister, you can't do that. I said, I want to pray. And they all looked at each other like, how can you say no to a nun asking to go pray, right? So I got myself in. But it was the most difficult thing ever that I have ever lived in my life. To see those kids all around me. I could barely even get myself to the center of the room, of the cell. There were clearly close to 100 kids in that cell. All crying, all looking up with me with tears in their face, pulling my dress and saying, sácame de aquí. Please get me out of here. No puedo respirar. I can't breathe. Oh, how I wish I could take them out. So I asked, let's pray. Vamos a rezar. And I said, Padre Nuestro. And they all echoed with me, Padre Nuestro, ayúdanos. Help us. Can't forget that. I have it like a dagger inside of my heart. I can relive it every moment I share this story. It was then that I realized the importance of what I'm doing at the border. One of the kids came up when I was there, told me, my mom is here. And I said, if your mother's here, you will go out today. And sure enough, that night, He ended up at the shelter with his mom. And as soon as he saw me, he comes running to me and just hugs me, and he wouldn't let go. I think that this is not right, that we can let children suffer like that. So we definitely have a lot to do. These parents, they go through so much to bring them here, because they know that if they stay home, their children will more than likely die or be recruited by gangs. They have no future. Unless we start looking for solutions that address the causes of why they have to leave, we're always going to see this suffering. The problem is not at the border. We're simply trying to respond to what is happening at the border. But if we really wanted solutions, we can find them. But we need to help those countries. We need to get our leaders to really push to find solutions to save humanity. Because truly, it's hurting tremendously. And all you have to do is come and see. You know, Jesus, in the Good Samaritan at the well, he says, "Give me to drink." And at the foot of the cross, he says, "I thirst." As leaders of today, I think we're called to quench that thirst. I think he's calling us for a thirst for justice. It is not okay to know in our hearts what we see is wrong. We must quench the thirst. Our hearts must burn within us for doing good. Sometimes we think, well, maybe I'm too old, or maybe I already did enough, or I'm already doing something. But I think you can do more. Our Holy Father even tells us, get tired of doing good. We must create communities as leaders that have compassion and just. As leaders of today, we must build Christian communities that really be a place of hospitality, of listening, and of communion. That is what our job is as leaders of today. Jesus is asking us to come closer, to recognize him in that person, that other, that somehow someone who disturbs our life and our comfort. We're too comfortable. We have a schedule, and let nobody mess with my schedule or my time when I do something, because then, it's not okay. We must allow ourselves to be uncomfortable. There's a young man that recently, today, we've seen a lot of people, close to 900 in one day. And sometimes during the day, I'm very busy and I don't get a chance to go to the respite center. So I end up going later hours of the night before my day is over. And one time I ran into this young man, and he lived about half an hour away. And he said, sister, one day I decided I wanted to see what you did. So I came to see, and here I am. After work, he shows up. He goes all the way from Harlingen to McAllen to help out for a couple of hours. And he said, I was very unhappy and angry. I was always upset with everybody. Now my life has changed. I'm more tired, but I'm happier. And now I'm inviting my friends and my family to come as well. We have to build Christian communities that really be a place of hospitality and welcome. I think that as leaders of today, we must allow ourselves to be uncomfortable and to do more. I also want to say that true leadership unfolds by accompanying others who are suffering. Smell like the sheep, as our Holy Father says that we must do. Well, I have an experience of how that smells. We don't have sheep in the valley where we are at, but we certainly have a lot of men and women that have walked for weeks and months, who have never taken a shower, who, when they take their shoes off, stinks, and smells really bad. And I'm just wondering that that's probably what the Holy Father meant when he said we have to smell like the sheep, So I give thanks to God for being part of that smell, because I recognize that is how I'm closer to Him. Instead of being bothered that it smells so bad, I'm glad I'm there to smile and to encourage and to bring hope to these families who are so grateful of the fact that we give them whatever it is that we give them. Just by walking through the doors of our Humanitarian Respite Center, they see a welcome smile, and we say, bienvenidos, welcome, ¿cómo estás? How are you? And they break into tears of joy, of unbelief. They finally reached a spot in their journey that somebody took recognition of them as a person. We have so much to be grateful for. When we see human suffering before us, and that we can do something, a simple smile, it's amazing the transformation it gives them. And from that moment, their dignity is restored. And you see the difference from the moment they walk into the center to the day they leave, which is the next day or maybe that same day, after taking a shower, eating something. You see them transform. Not only them, but us too. Our volunteers, our people who come and help us. They're transformed. There's something that happens when we allow ourselves to encounter the other in the way we do. God becomes present to both of us. People change. I remember this young man said that he was an attorney and he was not a Catholic. But after coming to volunteer, he decided to leave his profession and become a priest. And like him, so many others have testimonies, share their testimony, how it has changed their life. We must look to encounter and embrace the other. Persevere with joy on this path of faithfulness to humanity and to God, and placing the person of Jesus at the center. The question is, I don't know how I'm doing with time.
Just keep going.
Are you sure? But I don't have anything else to say. I want to leave you with one question. What would be your response? What is God telling you to do? Thank you.